Hello, my name is Michael Reese. Over the next couple weeks, I'm going to be hosting a number of interviews with some knowledgeable folks that have a variety of experiences in music and in education, in the hope of learning a lot and also covering some of the important topics of the 21st century for educators and for music programs. The first person we're talking to is Nick Riley. He's here today to talk to us about some of the ins and outs of adjudication in specifically high school marching band. A lot of this information could also apply to DCI, to WGI, and we might talk about that a little bit, but we're going to focus mostly on high school marching band. But before we get into that, Nick, thank you for being here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks for having me. My name is Nick Riley. This is, year 20 something in music, I would say. Just a little bit of kind of background about me. I started playing percussion at a really, really young age, got private lessons in like first or second grade, something like that. And then progressed through my school's band program, middle school and high school. Decided to major in music and get a degree in music education. And then I spent 10 years as a high school and middle school band director in Northwest Ohio before going back and pursuing my master's degree, where I'm currently a grad assistant at Ohio State in year 2 of the master's, hopefully sticking around for a PhD in the same area. So that's kind of the quickest version. I think to get a little bit more specific, I think I wouldn't be where I'm at now as an adjudicator, composer, arranger, and other things, ensemble administrator, without my high school band experience. I went to Centerville High School in the early 2000s and participated in the marching band, which was really competitive in BOA. We were national finalists at Grand Nationals 3 of the 4 years that I was there. And then I was in the indoor percussion ensemble, which at the time was also highly successful. We were, of the 3 of the 4 years that I was there, finalists at WGI, and then my sophomore year, we were a silver medalist in a Scholastic World. So that laid the foundation for my interest in marching band and interest in music greatly. I don't think if I went to another band program that I would be doing what I'm doing now. Outside of the professional, I think, world, so to speak. Well, I guess this is continued in this is the professional world, but the founder and co-director with you of ConneXus, and then I've done a whole bunch of other little things with ConneXus over the years. Front ensemble coordinator, front ensemble arranger, pit tech, you name it. Kind of every hat has been worn by those of us who've been around the ensemble for a long time. In addition to all of that, I do a ton of composing and arranging. That's kind of my main job now. Wasn't necessarily a goal to leave education, to leave full-time classroom teaching at any point in time. Just kind of happened because of grad school. And then I've managed to make a career out of composing and arranging. So I'll write about 20 to 25 high school marching band shows a year. And then anywhere between 5 and 15, just depends on the year. I think this year it's like 8 or 9, something like that. Indoor drumline shows. Also work for the Gran Banda, drum and bugle corps from Medellin, Colombia, as their composer for the percussion section. So a whole lot of kind of like random little experiences. As far as judging goes, this is year 10 in adjudication. So a whole lot of different kind of diverse experiences, but all kind of centering around one thing. I've never had a job that has been outside of the music field, which is weird. I never did like the work at McDonald's, a high school gig or anything like that, or summer jobs or anything. I got my first teaching and arranging gig out of high school. Right out of high school, I was 17. I had kids in the drumline that were older than me by a year. And that school was Archbishop Alter High School, just around the Dayton area. And they are now a Titanic program in Class A. And they do little band better than any other program in the country, I think. and they were just getting started when I was over there. So it's been fun. It's been really diverse and interesting, but all centered around kind of the same thing. My parents are teachers, so getting into education was kind of a natural, kind of the family business, so to speak. But I was never kind of pressured into education. It's just what I was surrounded by, and was naturally really interested in it. And then the music thing just happened to be kind of like the lens by which everything was filtered through. My mom's an artist, and was an art teacher, and my dad a social studies teacher. So neither, and then turned school administrator, but neither were musicians or are musicians. And so it was just kind of, I don't really have musicians in my family. So it just kind of happened, I guess. I'll have to, I guess, talk to my parents about like the very early memories, because I don't have those, but I know I remember getting into lessons really early, and then getting as involved. I think I took every music class in high school and middle school that I could. And then that just was translated into a professional career. So yeah, it's been super fun for sure.
Yeah, it's always kind of amazing in music. You can do like so many different things, have so many titles, do a lot of things at once. It's kind of like
Oh
the,
yeah.
it's like the original gig economy where you can just have six jobs. They all have different titles, and
Yeah, that's
it's
a,
awesome.
like, I guess if you were to, that's a great way of looking at it. I guess if you were to like list all of the jobs that I do, it's educator. It's really broad. But underneath that, I teach private lessons. This is current. I teach private lessons. I have a small little studio of piano and percussion students, about like 8 of them. I teach the methods classes at Ohio State to the undergrads. So I teach, interestingly, not percussion methods, but I teach woodwinds, which in this case is not double reed, but flute, clarinet, saxophone, and then brass methods. In the spring, I'm teaching intro to music ed, and then instrumental methods for the choral music educator, which I'm teaming up with 3 other GTAs. So that's all the teaching that's under one big umbrella. So that's teaching. You could count ConneXus in there too, and then consulting, composing and arranging, which we talked kind of about what's going on there. Primarily high school marching band. 5 to 15 indoor drum lines. Winter Winds is in there too. I usually have 1 or 2 of those. And then the drum corps, the Grand Banda. Ensemble administrator, so ConneXus. And then the various roles that go with that: program coordinator, ensemble specialist, all of those other things. A person who, along with you, approves the budget and maintains all the gear. My former life back into education a second ago as a high school band director, judge. So that's primarily high school marching band. I have over the years done a little bit of indoor percussion and winter guard judging, but it's been a few years. Just too busy in the indoor season with ConneXus and other groups. Consultant. So I had a couple of those this year. Bands will send me videos and say, hey, what do you think? And there's an exchange of capital and ideas. And then I don't know, is there something else? There's probably something else, but it is very much a gig thing, which made my parents nervous when I made the transition out of everyday classroom teaching into my taxes look horrible as a result. It's a big eye roller for my accountant every year to piecemeal all these different jobs together. But and it is hard to keep all the kind of balls in the air, so to speak. But super fun for sure.
Yeah, like sometimes the variety is pretty nice. Let's get into judging a little bit. Um, so you obviously were a high school band director for a long time, but like me, you did like a show style, college style marching band.
Yep.
How did you get into adjudicating competitive marching band?
Well, the show style, non-competitive marching band thing, I kind of came into that with the program that I was in. They had a long tradition of non-competitive band, and in Northwest Ohio, you'd be hard pressed to find many competitive programs. I can name like 3 that I was aware of up there. A lot of them did like things like what I called competition light. So they would do like a Friday night football game show, and then a totally different or sometimes semi-related Saturday contest show, or they'd take their Friday night show and do like 2 competitions with no real like serious goal, at least not goal competitively. They just might do that for extra performances, and there aren't many competitions up in that area. It's just a couple OMEA contests, but I think there's 2 in the whole area, maybe 3. You'd have to travel a couple hours to get to some of them, so it's just not an area that has kind of caught the competition bug. So my students weren't really even aware of competitive marching band, much less adjudicated competitive marching band, and had really no interest in it. And I loved that. Like I really enjoyed having a non-competitive program, and it actually allowed me to judge. Had I had a competitive program, I probably would have judged, but not nearly as much. And it wouldn't have moved as quickly as it did. I think I got into judging, so that my first ever kind of, and this is a big air quotes, judge experience. This is going to sound super dorky. So we had a day off when I was a sophomore in high school. We had a day off on Saturday. We didn't have a marching band competition, didn't have rehearsal. And I was, grew up in Southwest Ohio, so that's a hotbed for the marching arts. One of the most kind of dense areas of high quality competitive bands and competitive indoor percussion ensembles in the early 2000s when I was in high school, and then all the way into today. So anyway, we had a day off, and so what am I going to do? Had no plans. I'm 14, so what am I going to do? And so I decided to go to a high school marching band competition, and I printed off all of the Mid-States Band Association judge sheets, and I made like fake judge sheets, like judge comments, and then compared my numbers. This was 2004, I think. And then compared, so almost 20 years ago. Then I compared my numbers to the judge that was there, all informally. I was sitting like under the press box, like as high as I could get, as close to the 50 as I could get, hiding because this is super dorky. And then I looked at the numbers that the judge wrote down, and I was totally wrong, like way different. But I was really interested in it. I would always listen to the judge comments. This was back in cassette tape days, so our band director would have like a little basket and like a radio cassette player at the front of the room, and just whatever judge recordings we got that season, he would just toss the cassettes into that basket, and then any of us would be able to come up and listen at any point in time whenever we wanted. So I poured through every one of them, and looked at the recaps and tried to understand how scoring worked, because I was kind of interested as like how I'm a very competitive person kind of in general, and kind of an ambitious person, and so I was really interested to see like how we stacked up nationally. We were also really successful, so there was a real chance of us placing. My sophomore year we were 5th at BOA, so there was a real legitimate chance of us placing quite highly at BOA. So we were always looking at like, okay, so what's Carmel scoring? And Broken Arrow was just coming out in 2006, and who are they? And Marian Catholic, Titanic program, and all of these like major programs that were Avon, Kennesaw Mountain, Tarpon Springs, all these huge programs, and we were always looking, or I was at least, at what they were doing competitively. I knew that I wanted to be a judge just as soon as I got out of high school. So I started going to the summer sessions for the Central States Judges Association at I was 18 or 19, something like that, when I started going to those. My friend Tom Denuncio was a few years older than me, and he became a CSJA judge in 2012 or 2011, something like that. So this would have been the tail end of my college career, and I had kind of accompanied him. CSJA has a policy of you can, come in, check out the association and just kind of sit in on the clinics. So I did that, and then I think they had an age limit, like a bottom limit, and so I waited until I was, I think, 20 or 21, something like that. I started training before then, but I didn't actually I really pursue it until I was like 21 or so. And then I took 2 years to get through the training as opposed to just the one. because I felt I was a little young, and I was imagining sitting across the table from my teachers, and I wouldn't have much to say, and didn't have that experience. So I took the time to do that. And then, so that would have been 2013 was my first season with CSJA. Before then, I started as an OMEA marching band adjudicator for percussion specifically. That would have been 2012 was my first season. I trialed in 2010, 2011, something like that, on cassette tapes. It was my first trialing experience, was cassette tapes. And started an OMEA, and my motivation for starting an OMEA was I was really dissatisfied with the level of adjudication that my programs were getting in OMEA. I thought the tapes were poor, and the judges didn't have a lot of understanding of the numbers and spread and the value of a tenth and all of those things that we talk about as judges. And so my motivation to judge for OMEA was to give bands better recordings than the ones I had received. I was told one time on a recording, it was completely silent. And then at the end, the judge said, well, just needs a little more spit polish. And I'm sitting here like, what is that? What does that even mean? What is that? Like, how do my student, like, what is that? That's not education. What is that? So I was infuriated by that tape. And there were others like it. That was the worst one though. I was infuriated by it. A lot of the tapes just were critiques of the playing, or not the playing, but the composition, like too many rim shots in this composition. And it's like, that was the only feedback I got as a writer. And it's like, I don't agree with that. And that's the only thing we have to say. I just didn't like it. So that was my motivation there, is there's so many great bands that do just OMEA. And they weren't receiving, at least the bands that I was working with, which were quite a few, weren't receiving any commentary of any substance at the time. So things have changed, fortunately, but at the time it was sparse. So I did that kind of CSJA and OMEA kind of simultaneously. And then in 2018 or so, shifted over towards this kind of staying in CSJA almost exclusively. And they pay extremely well. You get to travel, which is nice, and judge a few different captions. I was able to get out of just percussion. There was a push a few years ago, probably around 2016 or so, to anyone who had was a band director or had a music ed degree. They wanted you to judge the music caption. So they pushed us over towards judging that. So I started judging music ensemble and music general effect. And I've kind of carved out a little home in music GE. That's my main caption these days. I think I did ensemble once. I did music individual once, and then I ended up making kind of like pretty good general effect tapes for those captions, unfortunately. But
yeah.
So they just keep me on GE these days.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit later about staying in caption and kind of how to evaluate judging and stuff. Especially if you're a director and you're getting that feedback. Where are some of the places you've gotten to judge? You mentioned traveling.
Yeah,
I know this year you've kind of been all around. So
yeah, this was 6 states this year. I've judged in 8 states total. See if I can name them all here. So Ohio. I only had one Ohio show this season, and that was last Saturday at West Claremont in Cincinnati area. All the other shows are kind of, the Kentucky shows are like 10 minutes over the border, so it's not a big trip. But so Pennsylvania, my first time there was for marching band was last year, and then I did a couple indoor shows there in 18. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, Missouri, and Tennessee. I think that's all 8. Pretty sure that's it.
Wow. So you're getting around.
That's so to speak, yes. And it's quite a lot of fun. The Missouri was first time this year. I was just outside of St. Louis. That was the music individual show. And then for a while there, I couldn't really travel because I was band directing. So I'd have football game on Friday night, and then there were a few times where I had a football game on Friday night, and then I would drive straight down to Tennessee and judge. And that was nuts. I'd get there at like 7 a.m. and then judge for a full day, sleep a lot, and then drive back all the way up to Toledo at the time. So that was terrible. One time I did that at the Marshall University contest in West Virginia. It was like 6-hour drive after a game. It was not fun, but would not recommend. But it was super fun to judge at Marshall and to judge those great bands down there too. So always
Right.
good to be in a new state. And that's new markets, new sheets generally. It's not going to be the same criteria, not the same number system. It can be quite different too.
Gotcha. Well, let's get into it a little bit. Kind of talk about adjudication. If, for any band directors that are listening, or instructors, or anybody that's like trying to be a judge, navigate judging, kind of give them some information that you think is relevant, and make sure that they understand what that process looks like, and why the numbers look the way they do, and why they're getting the feedback they're feeding, or feedback they're getting. So, question number one: what do
Mhm.
judges do? What's the point of a marching band judge?
There's 4 tasks that a judge does, and you'll recognize this from your own training this past year. Rank, rate, educate, and justify are the kind of the main 4. So ranking, you're determining the order. I always ask this question: is this the best band I've ever seen? Like ever, number 1, because that is it's a national linear scale, which means that the number that I give is comparable to every other marching band contest in the country. So is this the best band I've ever seen? And I have that like ideal performance in my head. Like, what would be a 100 for me?
Yeah. Wait, can I
Um,
interrupt you for a second? Can you
sure.
define national linear for
Yeah,
anyone that's
national
not familiar?
linear. Yep. National linear scale is essentially saying that the numbers, if I write down a 79, for example, that 79 is comparable to every band competition in the country. So if it's a 79 in mid-states, it's a 79 in Texas, it's a 79 in Orlando, it's a 79 in LA, or wherever the contest is being held. The idea here is that you're comparing your own experiences, seeing bands nationally. So I think one of the main things that a judge needs to do is see a lot of bands from different places. Regional linear scale is a good example of regional linear would be like OMEA. OMEA is a regional linear scale, so the numbers that you get at OMEA are not directly comparable to a BOA score. They could be 20, 30 points higher than the BOA score might be. The idea is that if a band goes to a BOA event, a national event, or any of the other kind of national circuits that might exist, that they should, in theory, receive a similar score from a local contest that they would at a BOA contest, and so on. So there is a lot of like, I will look at the BOA scores, and I know that this upcoming weekend I'm judging championships for mid-states. I'm aware of what some of those bands have received in BOA. And I know that if they're going to BOA, if I write down a 96 and like, wow, that's amazing, and then they go to BOA and they get a 72, then that's a huge issue. We don't want to blow
Right.
up numbers at the end of the season. So the idea is that the numbers are comparable. It's a continuum kind of across the country. And that's not all, markets will do that.
Right. Well,
But
and there's nothing inherently wrong with like a regional scale, like how
yep,
OMEA does it, but it definitely can be frustrating for those programs that participate in multiple circuits,
yep.
and have to
Oh
kind
yeah.
of reconcile like, oh, well, why do I have, score X in this circuit and score Y over here? And, the feedback is often different because they're operating off different sheets, and looking for
Oh
different
yeah.
things. So
Yeah,
for bands that are going cross circuit, it can be, frustrating to not be on that national linear scale.
and a lot of regional linear scales, like in Tennessee, Missouri, OMEA, those are the 3 markets I did regional linear this year. All 3 of those had a floor, a minimum score that we could not go below. So Missouri, I think the floor was a 50. Tennessee, the floor was a 50, and this out of 100. And then OMEA doesn't have a floor per se, but it's very rare to get a rating of 5 or even 4. And those ratings are in like the 50s and 60s. So that artificially, when you have a floor like that, it artificially inflates the number. Whereas, in a national linear scale, the floor is 0. You can go all the way. No one will, of course, but
Right.
in theory, you could. So that opens up probably about 20 points. That like 30 to 50 range opens
Right.
up about 20 points that you can use. So that's why if you're going from regional to national linear competitions, your number might drop 20 points or 10 points. And if
Right.
you're a band director, as long as your kids know that and your parents and admin know that, that's just how it works, and that's okay. And it's not comparable to a letter grade. So if you get a 71, you're not getting the band doesn't get a C minus. 71 is a really good score nationally, even this time of year. That's great. You're placing pretty well nationally if you're getting a 71. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about kind of national versus regional. There's nothing wrong with either of them. It's just an added layer of complexity.
Right. So yeah. So kind of going back, we were talking about the role of a judge, role of an adjudicator.
Yep. Yeah. So rank, rate, educate, justify. So ranking, I'm determining the order of the bands. So I see a group, and the first band is almost exclusively rating, rating. So I'm putting my number down. It's like, okay, cool. So I'm looking at my criteria reference and saying, all right, this performance meets these criteria that are on the back of the sheet. And it's in this box, it's in this area, and it's within this scoring guideline. And then within that scoring guideline, I'll place. So let's say it's I think it's somewhere in the 60s. If it's on the higher end of the 60s, it's approaching a 70. I'll use a number like a 68 or a 69 to show the band that they're moving towards that direction, but they're not there yet. And then obviously once you start getting into the contest, then you're rating a lot more. And that's my first thing is this the best band I've seen today? And if it is, then I have to give them a score that shows that. And if that's the case, then I have to say, okay, well, the previous best band that I saw today was an 82. This band's significantly better. Maybe my 82 is too high. And then I might have to go back and adjust a number. There's a lot of adjustment that happens, at least for me, afterward. I want to get it right. Some circuits, they'll require you to turn your sheets in immediately. And that can be very detrimental and can lead to things like ties and artificially high or low numbers, all sorts of problems. So anyway, rank, rate, educate. So we're telling this is through the recording, telling and educating the students and the staff. I always make my tapes like I'm talking to the band. Like if the band is sitting right in front of me, what am I going to say to the band? And there's things that we say that are directed towards the band and directed towards the designers and the staff and all that. But I want to make sure that my tapes are tapes that the band can sit down and listen to and they feel good about, even if that was not the best band I saw that day. They should still come away from listening to that tape motivated, feeling positive about their experience. And then justify. So I'm adding commentary throughout the recording that is within the scoring guideline. So I'm not saying if a performance is magnificent, unbelievable, wow, saying those types of things on a recording, then I better be giving a 90. Because those are words that you would associate with a 90 or an upper 80s number. So I'm using verbiage, adjectives, descriptors, enthusiastic reactions that are representative of where that score is going to be. So that way, when you listen to a tape, you should, and I say tape, that's old recording. When you listen to one of my judge recordings, you should be able to put down a score on your own. If you are aware of how judging works, you should listen to my tape and say, wow, okay, that's a tape that's in the 80s, or that's a tape that's in the 60s or whatever. I hate when I'm on the receiving end of these things and I hear commentary, and we've experienced this at ConneXus and other groups where you hear commentary and you're like, wow, that's amazing. And then the score is a 72. And like, oh, cool.
Right.
Well, thanks. And then your reaction is negative. So
right. And we've had it the other way too, where it's, a really not negative, but critical tape. And then the number is, very high. And
oh yeah, experienced that last season at World Championship semifinals.
Right.
We had a couple recordings that were quite critical. And then I looked at the numbers like a 91. Oh, okay.
Right. Well, and that's always a nice surprise, but it is inconsistency, which you're trying to avoid. Hopefully, going through the adjudication process.
And can be very tough to do. There's levels of training and disparities in training, and some people are better at it than others. And it's you kind of know what you get after you've heard a judge a few times. You kind of are aware of how that person kind of is related to scoring and criteria reference, things like that. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good segue to my next question, which, you know, there is a lot of not great judging out there, but I think a lot of time that's code for like, I don't like what they said. I don't like the number they gave me. So if you're a band director, if you have a group out there, how do you know if the judging is good, or if the judging is bad, or if it's just, what you wanted to hear, what you didn't want to hear? How can
yeah,
you tell when you're getting like a quality score or quality feedback?
I think one of the things that I'm kind of striving for again as a judge is just an honest reaction to the show, 100% honest reaction to the show. And I want to react to the show. If I'm talking specifically music general effect, I want an honest reaction to the show. And if I really like something, I'm going to enthusiastically react to that on the tape. And it's an honest, first, second, or whatever read. So I'd hope that if someone listens to my recordings, they're like, well, we might not agree with everything he said, but that's what he said. So why did he say that? And that's something that I listen for too. And I'm on the other end as an instructor, director, arranger, whatever. It's like, well, why are they saying that, or why are they focusing on this area of the show? We're supposed to be listening to the snare drums. Why are they talking about, the front ensemble in this portion of the show? And then I'm thinking, okay, so as a designer or an arranger or staff member, we've done something wrong because our focus is supposed to be on the snare drums in this moment. The judge is, talking about something else. We haven't directed their attention in the right place. And I think one of the things that you can listen for to recognize good judging is, does the judge get it? And if the show is put together well enough, it should be transparent. It should be easy for the judge to interpret. Sometimes the show has multiple layers and different meanings to different people, and you can design that way. And if they latch on to a meaning that's, personal to them, that has nothing to do with the show. We had a 2015 ConneXus, we had a infinity symbol in the drill. And one of the effect visual judges said, wow, so the show's called Tides of Change. So, the infinity symbol, it means that the tides are constantly changing. And all of us are looking at each other like, oh, sure. Yeah, that's what that means. We had no design, like we just thought it was a cool form. And it just worked. So from that point forward, we went through and we said, yeah, so Frank Miller, an amazing judge, Frank Miller said, this is what this means. So we just took on to that and latched onto it and made the whole kind of rest of the season commentary about that. So I guess first of all, if people don't like adjudication, they should ask themselves what they don't like about it. Do they not like the fact that they didn't score well competitively, or they didn't quote beat their competition or place as highly as they would, or is it just because the commentary is different? I know that for one of the bands I judged last week, and they came into critique and they said, this is the first time we've heard anything like this whole season. And it wasn't necessarily a positive. I said, well, that's my reaction. So there's something within your show that's causing me to think this way. So there's a stone that's been left unturned in your design. And that's something you should address. You only have a week, so you can't. But in future designs, think about why I might have said something like this. I've also gotten the opposite side of things, like, you're the only one to get it. It's like, oh, sorry. Like, I'm glad, but sorry that was the case. And then I think it's, if I'm listening and I'm hearing poor adjudication, the things that I'm hearing are like low level feedback, like good, oh yeah, nice, like things like, and that's it. Like just quick little reactions. What was nice? What was good? Why was it good? Give me some specifics. I talked about this with my undergrad classes this week. Teachers oftentimes are very specific with constructive feedback and are very vague with positive feedback. So they'll tell you what you're doing wrong, but if you're doing something well, they'll be like, oh yeah, good job. And it's like, give me some more information here. So poor judging, if judging is poor, the commentary and the number don't match. We kind of talked about that already, but I'm hearing a number, or I'm hearing commentary and I'm like, wow, this is going to be a 95. This is the best tape we've ever received. And then we look at the number and it's an 81. Or the other way around, it's, it's one of those tapes with hardly anything on it, and then the number is super high. And it's like, well, okay, I'm glad you liked it, but I think that number is artificial now, because were you digging in deep enough, things like that. um
Right. Well, and it doesn't help you in the future. It doesn't tell you
yeah.
like, oh, you really liked it because of XYZ. It's not setting you up to, enhance those things, to build on those things in the future.
if
Which is
if
the
you
educate
listen,
part of the
yeah,
judging criteria.
if you listen to any of my recordings, I talk constantly the whole show. And sometimes I'll miss the occasional voiceover. And I even recognized that on a recording last weekend. I always listen to my recordings. You can do so on Competition Suite. So I'll spend the drive back from the contest listening to all my recordings from the show and kind of judging my own evaluation, like evaluating my own judging. And I recognized something on the recording. I said, well, I just talked through, I'm sorry I talked through your voiceover, but it wasn't loud enough anyway. So it didn't pull me away from the commentary that I was making, because it wasn't loud enough in the mix. It wasn't clear enough. I recognized that a sound was happening and that it was a voice, and I did pause, but I didn't, hear everything. And you're not going to hear everything. Um, but at the same time, I'm always evaluating what I'm doing. And I have my bosses that are doing the same thing. Like all my tapes will get listened to by, Dave Kaiser and all those folks at CSJA, and we get feedback. We'll get written feedback a couple times a season about our recordings. Sometimes I'll get a phone call. People that I know, I'm judging their band, and they might call me. Steve Aaliyah, good friend of mine, one of my judging mentors. He wrote for like 4 bands that I judged a few weeks ago. I had no idea. And he called me and said, so let's talk about this one tape that you made for so-and-so band. And it's like, oh, I had no idea he wrote for them. I'm glad you liked the tape. But it was an interesting conversation, because you never know who's listening. I imagine that it's going to be kids, staff, parents, the internet. They can just upload that thing onto YouTube or any other social media, and anyone can hear your recording. So I want to, if my recording's played for people, I've had a few recordings put on YouTube before without my permission. And
Right. Well, that's more and
fortunately,
more common.
oh yeah.
You see that with DCI, you see that with WGI. I feel like the first one that comes to mind is that like the Mike McIntosh tape. I think that was like the first big one. And then that
Yeah,
now it's like
legendary recording.
yeah, now it's like DCI finals every year. You see a lot of those groups finals tape kind of find their way to YouTube.
And we saw a lot of that with Joe Allison and his passing earlier this year. A lot of Joe Allison tapes making it onto social media. Like I said, I think 3 or 4 of mine have gone on there. Unfortunately, I plan for every one of my recordings to be played for the entire world on a megaphone. And so I'll stick behind it. If anything, you're going to get authenticity, and I think that's the number one characteristic of a good judge. If we were to kind of circle back to that original question, that's the number one characteristic for me, is authenticity. Tell me how it is, and you can do so kindly. And I tend to do that. Like, when sometimes the band is struggling on the field, and it's like, maybe this was a big step for them just to be here today. If I know that a band is struggling, I'm not going to beat them up, and I'm not going to do that with my number either. I'll give an accurate read, but I'll be kind as well. And I think an empathetic judge, especially with what we've all been through the past couple of years, is really important. So if the soloist is great, I'm cheering for him. I mean, there's a recording from a few weeks ago that I don't even remember doing it, but I'm like screaming on the top of the press box because the bass run was really good. It was the cleanest bass run I've ever seen. There was a mellophone player in St. Louis. I was on field music, individual music, who was the best high school mellophone player I've ever heard in my life. And the field visual judge, who judges for DCI, he and I went to the band director and asked to meet the kid. And because I was in tears at the end of the performance. This was September, and we were just sobbing on the field. It was amazing. He was amazing. And we met and shook his hand after the show. He was nervous. Like, why do the field judges want to meet me? But I had the opportunity to tell that student to his face that he was the best high school mellophone player I'd ever heard. And that was a special moment for us. And I imagine for him too. And that's, we're human beings too. I'm the biggest fan of the program. I want the program to succeed. So it's, if something is great, I'm going to cheer for it. If something is not so great, I'm going to give you ideas to make it better. I'm going to be encouraging. And that's what I want to hear too, if I'm on the other side of it. Like if we have a great performance, I want to hear a judge give it up. If we are not doing so well, then, don't be mean. Like,
Right.
tell us, maybe give us some ideas. Tell us what you think we need to change. Authenticity, probably number one.
Right. Well, and I guess sort of related to that, throughout any given season, like odds are you're going to get some really good feedback. You're probably going to get some like not so good feedback.
Oh, yeah.
Like the chances of you going through a whole season and getting like exclusively like high quality scores and high quality feedback is unfortunately like pretty low.
Oh, yeah.
You
It's
know,
true.
even great judges have bad days. Even great judges
Mhm.
get like trapped on numbers. Stuff happens, and judging is hard. Um, so if you as as a staff, as an instructor, or even as a student, how do you know what feedback, what numbers to pay attention to, and which ones do you choose to ignore, and how do you, like, especially early season, both take the feedback seriously but not overreact in a way that has bad consequences later.
Sure. I think there's two kind of camps to this. There's the, like, from a staff perspective. Um, there's the, well, they just don't get it. They being the judges. Well, the judges just don't get it. We're just going to keep doing our thing. And then the feedback continues to be the same, and they say, well, they just don't understand. We're artists and they don't understand. It's like, well, yeah, you might be those things. You might be artists, but at the same time, this is a competitive activity. Numbers are being put down, and something that you're doing is or is not working. And then the other side of it is, you know, the judge noticed the one thing that I don't like about the show, so we have to change it immediately. And so I think cooler heads prevail in those situations. And I know with ConneXus, when we talk about some of our feedback, like, I'm not going to make a show change unless I hear it twice on a
Mm-hmm.
judge tape from two different people. And that could be at the same contest. We had some moments last year that we knew going in at the beginning were rough, and the judges said exactly what we thought. Like, we knew that these two, like, couple moments weren't working. They just weren't done yet or weren't produced. And so we decided to stick to our guns on that one because it just wasn't produced yet. We hadn't had enough time. So we played around with those moments and got them, better. And then we heard similar commentary 3 weeks down the road from two other judges. And it's like, okay, so this moment just doesn't work. Got it. So let's go back to the drawing board and fix it. And we're, fortunate to have performers who can handle huge changes like that. With a high school marching band, big picture changes, you kind of have to do it right the first time. And that's why having a great design team and having great arrangers and drill writers and choreographers and instructors is so important, because you're not going to have the luxury of having an October, they say this in elections, the October surprise, that kind of a thing. You get a judge tape that's like, wow, I've never heard that before. That's bizarre. And then but you happen to agree with it and you want to make a change. Your performers probably won't be able to handle it. And then you've got to weigh, excellence is the best effect. And that's something that I say on tapes a lot. Excellence is the best effect. Kids playing and marching really well is the best effect that you're going to have. You could have a show about nothing, and if they play and move really well, it's effective. It just is. That's the activity. So those that say things are about props and electronics and costuming changes, it's not true. 60% of the sheet's music. It's about execution in a lot of ways. And so my advice to that is always, if I would say this in critique, if this is the first time you've heard it, take it or leave it. At the end of the day, what you do with my commentary is what you do with it. If this is the first time you've heard it, take it or leave it. I read into a show last week, and the band directors were like, we're just trying to do a simple marching band show. And you're talking about monsters and ice and eyeballs and all sorts of image. And it's like, well, you did all those things. What am I supposed to like? What am I supposed to talk about? And they're like, well, it's not about any of that. Oh, okay. Well, you're playing moves super well, so maybe you need another layer in future shows. You only have a week left, but maybe in future shows you need to explore those layers more. But that was the first time they'd heard that a week out from the end of the season was anything like that.
Right.
So yeah, if I'm the first, I'll say that in critique. If I'm the first person to say it, wait for it to happen again. But sometimes I'll confirm the suspicions the staff has, or I'll highlight things they already know, or they'll come in and they say, we know, it's just been a long day. And it's like, I get it. Anything else you need to know from me, like it's all on the tape.
Right.
But yeah, just cooler heads prevail, I think, is the main thing there.
Right. Well, and it's a long season, so I think there's a lot of value to like, waiting for that second time, especially if you
Yeah.
go to enough shows that like that's a week later,
Hmm.
you get that second opinion because, they might not only notice the same problem, they might have a better solution or a different idea on the solution. And
Get your
there's some
show
value to
done.
that.
Yeah, get your show done early, get out to a contest, get your feedback going, and make sure you have time to clean. Because good ideas are great, but if you don't
Mhm.
have time to make them executed at a really high level, it's never going to translate in the way that you want. So
Right.
some bands will wait till October to compete, and that works for them. But um, that would make me nervous if I were a director. I'd want some feedback kind of early. So if we have made a wrong decision, we have time to make a change.
Right. Yeah, and after you've been around it a while, you start figuring out, who has a good read on things, and you can maybe like weigh those judges' opinions a little bit
Oh, sure.
more.
Oh yeah.
And like trust their first read. That's not to say like every once in a while they won't have a bad opinion, but for the most part, you're gonna figure out, who has good first reads, and
Yeah.
and you can maybe take them more seriously, even if they're the only person to say it. Especially if you see them early season.
There are two effect judges that I'm thinking of in WGI. And I'll go ahead and say their names because I have such respect for them. It's Chad Heine and Matt Stevens. And if either of those guys say anything, I'm doing it. I think they have, the best first reads in the business on those captions, um, and just get it at a really high level. There's also fabulous other judges in those captions too, but if they say it, those are my go-tos. If they say it, we're doing it this week. Um, that kind of a thing. There's others too that are like that, but we happen to see both of those guys at our first contest this year. So all ears, we're ready.
Gotcha. So this next part, it's a little different, and we don't have to get totally in the weeds on all this stuff.
Sure.
But walk us through like a judging sheet. So maybe you want to talk about mid states if that's the one you're most familiar with. But I think there's a lot of directors out there, a lot of staff people out there that either A, never look at the sheets they're getting evaluated on, or B, they look at them really superficially. They don't necessarily like go by word and figure out, what
Yep.
in practice do I have to do to check these boxes. So give us a little advice on how to understand the sheet, how to, navigate the sheet, and like maybe a little bit of how to understand what it's telling you.
I'm going to try to pull this one up. I'm locating it here. Um, oh, here it is. Perfect. Um, can we do screen sharing?
I think so.
All right. Can you see my GE sheet here?
We got it.
Perfect. Okay. So this is the music GE sheet for mid states. There's also a whole bunch of other sheets here. This is on the Central States website. But this GE sheet is really great. And it's great because it's a one-stop shop. It's a one-sided sheet. Sometimes the sheets will have these large descriptions on the back, and it'll be like just the score on the front, like maybe this kind of rubric here, and then the descriptors. And then on the back, there's these huge paragraphs of criteria reference and things like that you have to read. What I like about this sheet is it's just a sentence or a couple words, and it's quick. And this GE sheet is modeled after the BOA sheet. And a lot of music GE sheets will look like this. So a couple just to get the lay of the land here. All sheets that are kind of constructed in this way are what and how. So it's what is being performed, so the repertoire, and then how is it being performed, or the performance. Then if you look at, let's just stop in a random other sheet. Here's percussion, still what and how, and it's content and performance. Color guard, still what and how, content and excellence in this case, or performance. So all the sheets are kind of structured that way. Music ensemble is a little different, but either way, this one is what and how is the general one. So what are they doing and how well are they doing it? Music repertoire effectiveness is the show. So you're evaluating all of these things and other stuff too. It's not not just that, but creativity. You can, see the descriptors, coordination and staging. I blow this up. Like, this is huge for me. This is drill. This is color guard, choreography. This is, this is also creativity is props. It's electronics. It's field setup. It's choreography that the band is doing and other things. Range of mood and emotions. This is, tempo map, a style, things like that. Substance and depth. This is an interesting one. Have levels of quality, substance, depth, continuity, development, and climax impact. So you're leading me to a moment. We're getting to that moment, and there's some sort of resolution. Depth is a big one that I talk about a lot. That was that monster show. It was a really clever title, and the band was fabulous. They performed really well. It was the best I'd ever heard that band. Their show had less substance and depth than I thought it did. They performed at such a high level that I thought they had a deeper meaning to their show. The director said, "No, we're just trying to have a really good, like, simple band show." So their substance and depth wasn't very high in their opinion. In my opinion, I thought it was. Fortunately for them, I was the one writing the number down, so it worked out pretty well. Variety, this is huge for me too. Like, a variety of orchestration. We're hearing from solos and small ensembles, the full ensemble, the percussion section. I don't want to hear tootie the whole time, full band. That is just not going to generate effect. So this is show construction. And so this is 50%. So I talk about show construction about half the time. Sometimes I'll talk about show construction a little bit more than other judges, but music performance, this is how the performers are interpreting all of the things they've been given. So communication is a big one. Entertainment factor. We had a show last week that was quite straightforward. They did some Michael Jackson music. The show didn't have a ton of depth to it. It was Michael Jackson music, but man, was it fun. It was really good. They performed the heck out of it. They had kids singing like Michael Jackson, playing guitar like Eddie Van Halen. And I mean, it was great. So their performance effectiveness score was actually higher than the repertoire effectiveness score for me. Emotion, are the students emotional? And this is also me too. Do I get emotional? And then you can see display appropriate emotions and so on. I just get, if a student nails it, that I just have a soft spot for that. And I had a band in championships last year that they did their last horns down, and those kids were just losing it. And you could tell that they just had the best performance. And it made me, I'm getting teary now thinking about it. It made me, seeing kids love music that much is effective. And so they communicated that emotion in that period of that show at a really high level. They went from 6th place to 3rd place in my caption between prelims and finals last year. Professionalism, this is kind of the least evaluated one, I think, but professionalism can be like maintaining character when you're moving a prop. That's something I've talked about this season a few times. Turning on the speakers when the speakers aren't working is a nice, demonstration of professionalism, things like that. Artistry, mastery is the technical elements, how well are we moving and playing? So I'm not talking about necessarily the nitty gritty of moving and playing. The music ensemble people are doing that, but I'll mention if articulations aren't the same, because that's effective. When the articulations are all the same, it is effective. When they are not, it is not effective. So I'll mention it, and I'll let the music ensemble people go into detail. So that's kind of what these two boxes are about. And then you can see that they're each out of 100 points with a 200 baseline. And then we just move the decimal over, so it's out of 20. And then this is the scoring, actually. So you can see this top row here of numbers is per subcaption, and then the bottom row of numbers is your bottom line score. And so I'm evaluating out of 100 each of these subcaptions. Most performances that we're going to see throughout a season are going to land in box 3. This is your kind of like average. You're doing well. Occasionally, often. This is kind of big though, this difference, occasionally and often. So occasionally is occasionally and often is often, right? So if you are here, right here, I'm saying you're almost there. It's getting close. But if you're down here somewhere, we are closer to here than we are to here. So when I'm scoring, I'm thinking about where in this box I'm located. So if I give a band a 48, they're right here. They're almost box 3B, which is this often. They're almost there. And I'm showing them with my number that they are achieving close to here. So a lot of band directors will look and say, oh, geez, we got a 49 in a sub caption. Oh, that's awful. In reality, that's pretty good. They're almost here. They're showing progress and growth. Box 5 is really rare to get into. That's rarefied air. I've only written box 5 numbers down in 10 years, maybe 4 times, 3 times, something like that. If I give a box 5 score on a national linear scale, I'm saying you're making BOA finals. If you were to go to BOA finals, I think you could make BOA finals. I think a 90 is the baseline for BOA finals, and we'll see that here in 2 weeks, or actually next week. Geez. And I would bet that a majority of those bands are probably going to be scoring that make finals are in the very upper end of the 80s into the 90s, and the winning band will be a 98 somewhere, 97, something like that. So box 5, it says consistently. That doesn't sound too exciting, but imagine getting anywhere from a small band, 30 students maybe, all the way up to 300 students doing everything consistently the whole time. That's tough. So that's rarefied air to get up here. The winning score for the championship ensemble that I'll be judging this week is probably going to be around an 80, somewhere in there if I were to just guess. I know what that band has scored in some other competitions, or what those kind of upper echelon bands typically score. So I'm thinking, okay, my top number will probably be around here. My bottom number will probably be here. And then I've got to fit 25 bands in between a 45 or so, or a 40 and about an 80, approximately. And there's going to be a lot of bands sitting in here in this range, because these are big. This is 30 to 40 points in box 3. We don't use box 1 or box 2 really at all. That's why I haven't even addressed them. I've never written down a box 1 number. This is demoralizing, this score. And that's why it's only 10 points at the bottom. I've seen judges give out box 1 numbers. I'm just not that judge. And I will probably never write down a box 1 score. Box 2, I mean, I've only dipped in there a handful of times in 10 years. And when I do, it's been like 29. But you can send the same message with a 31 that you can send with a 29. And that I'd rather give that band a 31 and rather than a 29 and keep them in box 3. Box 4 scores, like I said, if you're 70 or above, that's great. And think about this, your administrators will think a 70 is a C-. That's not true at all. On this scale, a 70 is box 4. You're achieving at a high level. A C- isn't necessarily a high level of achievement on a test, but in marching band, a 70 is high level. So showing the sheet to the students and showing the sheet to the parents and the band boosters and the admin and all that, it's pretty important for them to understand the scale. Box 3 is enormous.
And right. Yeah, and I know your numbers. So that last place semifinalist group at BOA Nationals next week, where are they gonna be sitting?
Last place is 75. 70.
Right. So so that low to mid 70s, you're talking about you are in the pushing semifinals, upper third of bands in the country.
Yeah. I think like a good baseline number, if you want to be confident about semifinals of BOA, you want to get an 80. And then even then that might not be the number. We'll see next week, but some years it's more like an 82 or an 83 or an 85 even. And to score that high to make the top 35 bands in the country or so, however many it'll be this year with their rule system, I mean, that's an enormous accomplishment. And you might do that with an 80 or something like that. You might not do that. You're not going to get a 100. No one's gotten a 100. Groups have gotten close, but no one's gotten a 100. So it's not possible to get, I don't think it's possible to get 100. I don't think it's going to happen. I think groups will score above a 100 before they'll get a 100, but yeah, it's just, I don't think it's possible. You've got to get, 7, 9 judges, however, to all put down the exact same score, and it's all got to be 100 in order for that to happen. Otherwise, you're going to get a 99.975 or something like that. Yeah. So anyway, if you're making BOA semifinals, you're getting an 80, probably. And that's why I'm thinking that, you know, with the class that I'm judging this upcoming week, there's some bands that could be doing that, that could actually make BOA semifinals. So the bands, the, you know, the top echelon, upper echelon bands in the class that I'm judging this weekend, you know, they could be around an 80. And that is me
Hmm.
saying I think they have a chance at making BOA semifinals. And that
Right.
there's a couple bands that I'm thinking of right now that have already scored in the upper 70s, and they did that 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And so top score in the country right now is a 93, something like that. So
Yeah. Well, and that just goes back to kind of what we were talking about with, helping your parents and administrators understand, because like the groups you're talking about, like one of those bands is going to be a mid-states band association like champion,
mhm.
and they're probably going to get an 82.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
and so, a lot of
80.
times you think, yeah, a lot of times you think end of season, they're a champion. Of course they're going to get a 98.
Mhm.
But that's not really how it works. And that's where
Yeah.
that like ranking versus rating comes in, to where like they are the number one band, but they're being compared to groups that aren't at that show. That way the
Yeah.
number is, relevant.
It's exactly right. And it's national linear. So they're being compared to the bands that are at the show, and they're being compared to every band in the country. And so the idea is that if a small band of 30 students, for example, gets an 80, then that is comparable to an 80 that's earned by a band of 200 students. And size of ensemble does not create general effect. Big bands can be loud and all of that, but you can have amazingly effective small bands. I'm judging class 1A this upcoming weekend for mid states, and class 1A is, I believe it's 30 or fewer musicians, and that doesn't count color guard. So you can have 200 color guard members and 30 30 winds and percussion. But I absolutely love 1A. It is really hard to judge. It's 25 bands that are no larger than 30 or so students. I don't forgive me, I don't know the number exactly, but small bands. And you can max this sheet out with a little group. You can score in box 4 with a small group. I would bet that almost all of the finalists, the top 10 out of that class of 25, this Saturday, will score somewhere in here, in the bottom half of box 4. Your 10th place might be like a 65, something like that. But you're a finalist out of 25 bands. You could be 10th place and get a 65. And to an administrator, that's a D. To a band, a 65 is almost high level. It's often, it's the upper echelon, it's finalist caliber. And then theoretically, if all of those bands were to go to BOA, theoretically they should place, or not place, but they should earn a similar score if they were to go to a regional or a grand nationals. So that's what I'm thinking of. It's like, what are they going to do in a week? And I don't want to give them a 90 because that's inaccurate. I'm sending them a message that is not correct.
Hmm.
And we were given instructions. We just got an email early this week. All the judges that are on, all the music judges. I know visual has too. I just don't see those emails. But the first instruction, one of them was, don't blow up the scores. It's the end of the season. Don't overscore. Give them what they earn. And that way you get the warm and fuzzies. Oh, it's the end of the season. We've had such a great season. I've seen so many great bands, 92. And then they go to BOA and get a 61. And then they come back to us and say, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Well,
And
especially, they're, obviously at this point they're already registered for nationals, but these programs, these band directors, they make decisions based on these numbers, whether or not they're gonna, pay a lot of money to go to grand nationals. They're gonna go on these trips, a lot of
100%.
that's for the experience, but if they're being sold like you're gonna be in semifinals, you're gonna do really well, and then they go there and experience something really different, then like we're not really serving those kids, we're not really serving those
Yeah.
programs.
And, I'll be in critique sometimes and I'll say, you really should go to BOA. And a lot of the directors, every time I say that, the directors are like, really? You think so? Because they're expecting that means that I'm thinking they're going to make finals. And that's not necessarily true. It's, you should go to BOA because I think you're going to get great feedback. Number one. Number two, this is kind of number one as well. Your students are going to have a
Hmm.
blast. They're going to have an amazing experience. And then, you're scoring well enough that your students are going to go there and have a good time and be proud of the number they get. And if I put an 80 down and that band's not going to BOA Grand Nationals, well, come on, this is the year. It's too late now, but next year. I said that to a few bands last weekend. Like, you should go to I know you're not signed up. I've already looked. You should go to BOA, because this is successful. You are competitive nationally. I've seen bands all over over 100 bands this year, all over the country. You could compete with the best of the best. So do it.
Right. Well, and just to kind of take us back to how we started this conversation, that all comes back to knowing what's on the sheet.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of teachers out there that mean really well and like are focused on making their group good, but they end up with something that can't get rewarded on the sheet because they haven't spent enough time with it. So it's possible to be a good group, but you just aren't following the sheet. So, it's important to like know what you're getting adjudicated on, and go through that sheet, because, we just had a long conversation about how this sheet feeds these numbers and these numbers dictate XYZ. I think
And
there's a lot of people out there.
I will agonize over a number. Like, there was once I could tell you which band and where. But this season, I told them in critique, I said, this is the hardest number I've written down the whole season. And I want you to look at it very carefully, because I'm sending you a message with this number. And here's why I did what I did. And I walked them through the whole process of what I was thinking. Here's why. And it's an art to get that right. And here's why you're in this placement above this band. I think that this is where your show is and your performers are here. Your show is the right vehicle. It's great. You just got to get your performers up. One of the bands I consulted with this year, the only thing I consulted them on was interpretation of the mid-states sheet. And that they brought me on board, paid me some money to teach the staff how to interpret numbers and commentary from judges in mid-states. And kudos to that director, because they didn't maybe feel comfortable with that themselves. They asked me. I wasn't going to judge them at any point in time that season, so I could go on their team, and it was great. And I think they're gonna be very successful this upcoming weekend in their class, just because they know the sheet, they understand how to create effect based off of the descriptors on the sheet, and they've made changes to their show that are designed to earn more points on that sheet. So
yeah, you got to check those boxes. It's kind of the reality of the activity is, you should know what you're getting judged on. So in terms of using this feedback and taking this critique you're getting from the judges, I know they do this at mid-states. They do this at pretty much every drumline circuit. I think it's starting to become more of a thing in OMEA, but it's definitely not everywhere. It's just like this idea of having critique, of having an opportunity to go in and talk to the judge. So if you're a band director and you're going to critique, what should you do? I can speak as a band director. I've gotten the advice of like go in with a point, go in trying with like something to prove and like something to argue. There's a lot of people that are like, go in and just listen. But sometimes that doesn't get you the best results because it's a lot of just looking at each other. What's a good, work most of the time strategy for handling critique, especially if you don't get to do it very often?
First things first, listen to the recording, listen to the tapes. Have a person on your staff who's the lead for that table. We do this at ConneXus. Have a person on your staff who's the lead for the music table. Maybe it's a designer, the director. Have a person on your staff who's going to talk to the color guard person, the percussion person, the visual people. And those are the folks that listen to the tapes. Maybe you're not going to have time to listen to all 7 or 9 or however many tapes you have, especially for the last band on. But if you divide and conquer like that, and then go in, have a list of things that maybe you have questions about, because the first question I ask as a judge is, did you get a chance to listen to the recording? And then if the answer is yes, then I follow it up with, what questions do you have for me? So it's not me, I'm not talking yet. I'm asking them the questions. I want them to talk to me. And if they haven't listened to the recording, maybe they just haven't. And, something happened, or they haven't had time, or they're the last band on and they went on 20 minutes ago. I don't expect those groups to listen to the recordings, but sometimes they do. And with technology these days, they can listen to it in the hallway on their phones. especially if the show's a competition suite show or even Dropbox. But anyway, they should go in, if directors come in with a point to prove and it's done so with a bad attitude, that word gets around the judging community. I will judge with multiple people a year. I've had really negative interactions with staff members at before, and I still talk about it. And it might have happened 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And I'll still be like, well, that was the worst experience I've ever had as a judge when so-and-so came in and ripped me up in critique. And that doesn't make you look good as a staff member. If you don't agree, that's okay. And you can tell me that, that's fine. But at the end of the day, let's talk about maybe why we disagree. At the end of the day, I'm the one writing the number down. So you might not agree with that, but let's have a discussion. Maybe I missed something as the judge. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I didn't look in the right spot or listen to the right thing, or I didn't get it. And there's times where I'll say on the tape, I'll say, I'm looking forward to talking with you in critique. I want you to educate me about this part of the show. And it's a conversation. And then hopefully they come in and they say, okay, so we heard your comment. The ballad is really about this. And you need to listen to the oboe soloist. And they are, we chose this color on the flag because it coordinates with this idea. And then it's like, oh, okay. I had a show last week that the ballad music and the color of the flag made no sense together. It was a really dark flag and the music was super major. And I mentioned it on the tape. I said, I don't understand this design choice. The color guard is amazing. They were playing really well. Aesthetically, it was like content wise and the what and the how, it was right there. But aesthetically, it didn't make sense to me. It was a juxtaposition. So I said, I'm not gonna get too bogged down in that, but I want you to tell me about that in critique. And they said, oh, it's about because their show is about is about space, and it's about a dying star, I think is what they said. And it's, oh, great. Okay, that makes total sense. Thank you. I will never see them again this season. But if I did, now I know what to look for. So the staff that educates the judge on and helps them understand something they didn't get. I've been asked to go into critique before and say, hey, you need to tell so-and-so that their numbers are wrong. And it's like, okay. And this was a nationally known judge that I had to go stand in front of and when I was working for Drum Corps and say, you're wrong. And how I did it was, this score is 20 points lower than any score we've received this season. Help me understand why you wrote down that number. And that's how I approached it, instead of saying you're wrong, because we're going to see this guy 4 more times.
Right.
I don't want to leave a bad impression. And it's a conversation. As a judge, I always start with a smile. I try to make them laugh in critique. It can be really intimidating to sit across from the table. It's been a long day for everybody. So tensions can already be a little high. And especially if you've heard the tape and you hate something the judges said, or you just look at the score and it's awful, or you've had just the worst contest day of your life, you're tempted to come in and just be sour, and that doesn't get anyone anywhere. I've had to shut down critiques before because of that. To say, I'm sorry, I think we're done here. Have a great day. And that's the end of that, because I'm not going to argue with anyone. But that's happened. I can count that on one hand in 10 years. Most band directors are really wonderful and just want to learn. And a lot will ask a lot of questions. Some will explain. The ones that don't have anything to say, we just kind of look at each other for a little while, because my comments are on the recording. I've written down some notes. So I usually try to have 4 bullet points, 4 talking points about every band. I've written down my notes and I can tell them the 4 bullet points, but those are just highlights of things I've said on the tape. Like, these are the most important things. Please don't start a movement with the hi-hat tap off. That is not effective. And I told the band that there are a couple bands that did that over the season. And I told the band, I leaned across the table and I said, I literally hate that. I literally hate that. And I made them laugh. It was silly, but I literally hate that. And you need to change that. It is not working. I said, it is probably costing you 3 points in each of my subcaptions right now, because that is just not a mature decision. And the rest of your show is so good, and the kids are so good, and the show makes so much sense, and it's wonderful. And then you tap off every movement with a hi-hat on the drum set. What are you doing here? Like, it doesn't make sense. Help me understand. So, and they agreed. They're like, yeah, we're doing it Monday. We got it. We're doing it Monday. And I said, good, because I see you at championships. And then some band directors will come in and they'll just take down every note that you say, and they'll ask and they'll make it a conversation. And the best critiques are conversations, helping the judge understand something they missed, redirecting their attention, explaining the background of something, and just a kind interaction. Just overall, I think is we're all people. We're all band directors probably, or instructors. We've all been on the other side of the table, probably more than we have when we've been judging. And so I might sit across the table from a judge and really hate everything they said, but still it's a nice conversation, and still it's a positive representation of my ensemble. And so I'm thinking like, that judge is going to think everything that I say is related to ConneXus or related to another ensemble I'm working with. And they're going to think that our group is like that if I go in with a bad attitude, and that impression sticks with them for the duration of the season. And that can be very detrimental competitively and just in general. You don't want to be a bad person. So be nice
Right.
people.
Yeah. Well, and that just reminds me of what we were talking about earlier about, how do you know what judges to not take seriously, but to weigh and to really listen to. And something we kind of left out was knowing who you're going to see again. If you're going to see that judge multiple times throughout the year, like, maybe that is someone you listen to the first time because you're going to
Oh
see
yeah.
them again. So, fixing it for their second read, fixing it for their third read,
Mm-hmm.
offers you a lot of reward.
Yep.
Especially if judges are paying attention and they're going to follow the numbers other people are given. Um, it can kind of set you up to play the game a little bit to be successful that season.
Oh yeah. I think that's really important. Like we did that last year. We saw one judge 5 times. And we knew that going in. I'd analyzed all of the judge sheets, and I knew who we were going to have at all the local shows and the regionals. And we didn't know national, like world championships yet, but and sure enough, we saw that judge at world championships, and we said, okay, we're going to see this guy 5 times. Whatever he says the first time, we're going to do it. And we did it, and he noticed it on the recording, and his number steadily improved, and he steadily recognized our changes based on his commentary. And that was a designed usage of critique and a designed usage of scoring in the design process specifically.
Yeah. All right. Final question. If someone's looking to become a judge or even just to learn more about judging, what resources are available to them and where should they look?
Oh, talk to a judge. Talk to a judge. When I asked where should I, what should I do? I want to go to the next level. The CSJA was that next level. I talked to my high school band director. My high school band director was Wayne Markworth, and Wayne Markworth, legend in the activity, an amazing teacher, arranger, you name it. One of my favorite people on the earth, and I respect him incredibly. We had a kind of an interesting. I'll come back to that in a minute. That's a good kind of like wrap up little short story. But I just asked Wayne, hey, I want to get into judging. Where do you recommend? And he said Central States. And that's the oldest judge association in the country, one of the most respected. They really train their judges. And my mentor was Brad Bell, who I have an incredible respect for. I think he's one of the best percussion judges in the business. And I knew that because he judged my groups, and he would hear things that I didn't hear, and I was the instructor. And we would take things out that week because we'd see Brad, like, all right, we got to play the check pattern here instead of the roll because Brad's here. We'd go to critique, and he would literally say, did you take that roll out? I heard you 2 weeks ago. Did you take that roll out just because you're going to see me again? And it's like, oh, dude, how did you know that? Like, yes, we did. And I said, no, of course not. And yeah, in my head, I'm like, oh God, we totally did that. So getting involved in an association like Central States. OMEA does judge training too. Their entrance process is different from Central States. Either way, in order to get into either association, you got to know your stuff. You got to have done this for a while. So the first thing to do, I guess, before even thinking about judging is doing a lot of teaching and designing and building your brand, building your name, so to speak, building your experience in that area, making sure that you understand the language that you're about to speak because you've walked the walk and you've talked the talk for X number of years. Listen to your judge commentary. analyze the scores, talk to the judges, go to critique. The bands that don't go to critique, that have the opportunity to, doesn't always leave the best impression. What do you mean you don't want to get better? Like, okay, isn't that what we're all here to do, judges and staff alike? So go to critique. But anyway, yeah, so getting associated with a judge or a judge association. I have several mentor judges that I've worked with, like Brad, Wayne was one of them, Steve Aaliyah, Tom Denuncio, and Steve and Tom are visual judges. But Steve and Tom and I have done a ton of designing together and teaching together in drum corps and other avenues indoor. And we spent so much time analyzing scores. And I think both of them are fabulous judges, and are championship level adjudicators. I'm judging with Tom this weekend on Saturday. Steve's at a different site, but we're all championship level adjudicators. And I have great respect for the numbers they put down and they're good friends, of course, first, but we'll talk about scores all the time, and talk about numbers, and we'll analyze the scores for the groups that we work with and all of that. So staying active in it, I think, is really important. And I think, if you want to become a judge, you got to have a real purpose. This is one of my favorite things to do. And it's not just because I get to judge people or bands. That's not the reason. It's because I get to help kids, and I get to talk about marching band for 10 hours. I'm really looking forward to Saturday because it's a 14-hour judging day. I have to be there at 8 a.m. and we're going to be there until at least 10 or 11 at night. I have 25 bands in prelims and 10 in finals. I'm so excited for that. I'm a little sick right now, and I'm trying to get better so that I, enjoy that experience even more thoroughly. But I remember how important marching band was to me as a kid. And then I get to be the person on the other side of the recorder that I listened to when I was a high school kid. I get to be that person for another high school kid. And this was another fun little short story. Judged in Tennessee 2 years ago and ended up getting COVID while down there, unfortunately, through judging. But anyway, I had a mom of a band member message me on Facebook about my judge tape. She said the whole drum line had gathered around it and listened to it at some point in time. And she was a senior parent. And she said the drum line was in tears, like they hadn't been recognized that way the whole season. They'd been scoring low, and they ended up winning the show. I thought they were unbelievable. One of the best drum lines I've ever seen. And she reached out, found me on Facebook and reached out and said that she wanted me to know how much that recording meant to her son and his friends. And it just made their season. And that is one of the reasons why I do it. And that's super, super cool. The other is the camaraderie and the experience that you have. Back to my last little Mormon fuzzy. So Wayne was my band director and my first kind of like, let's get into judging, where do I go kind of mentor. And I had the opportunity to judge with Wayne at Lebanon, which was the site that I went to when I was 14 or whatever, 15. I did my judging. I happened to be the chief judge of that event. Wayne and I were judging Music GE together, and Steve Aaliyah and Tom Denuncio were on the panel. And so it was very full circle. I got emotional even thinking about it, because here's the site of where I really started to dig into judging. And I'm judging the same caption with my former high school band director, who's incredibly important to me, and judging with two of my best friends ever, including, especially in the activity, but just period. What a great day. And it was 25 bands, and we had to get the numbers right. One of the bands there was a national finalist at BOA. So putting down the right number for them, lots of pressure for every band, but even more for them. So that was just a cool experience. And you get to have those really fun experiences judging. You get to eat a lot of good food too. So yeah, but that's why we do it. Judges are people. And I think every judge has one of those warm and fuzzies. Or I hope they do, at least at one point in time. I had other warm and fuzzies, but that one takes the cake, I think. So we'll see. But yeah, it's a blast. I absolutely love it. It's what I like to do.
Gotcha. Well, Nick, thank you so much for your time and sharing your experience and all your knowledge. And I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate that you're doing all these little podcasts for the activity, and hope lots of people tune in, and hopefully it goes well for you. Appreciate you asking me.
Thanks.